Okay, I think we're all joining. Let's see, people are here. Fantastic. Okay, we are going to get started. Um, Welcome to our webinar, Why Social ROI Breaks and How Brands Are Fixing It. I'm Leah Haberman. You might know me from my newsletter, ICYMI, or in case you missed it, all about social and creator marketing. I'm going to be your moderator today. We're going to be talking about predictive signals and intelligence. So instead of planning campaigns and then measuring them, we are flipping that on its head. So it's going to be about using all available signals to understand and estimate performance before you've spent any time or money. 2 household notes. We are recording, so you'll be able to watch this later. We'll be sending that out. And then check out at the bottom, there's a resources section, hopefully at the bottom of your screen, at the bottom of Zoom. There is a Engineering Social Era report in the resources center. So you should be able to grab that, a white paper from Viral Nation. And then I've got 2 fabulous panelists that I want to introduce who are going to help us unpack all of this. Viral Nation's EVP, Rochelle Betweegas, and Weight Watchers Head of Talent, Social, and Influencer Strategy, Joel Porter. So I'm going to ask you both to introduce yourselves and then also tell me what's inspiring you. So the last TikTok or Reel that you shared into the group chat. So Rochelle, let's start with you.
It's great to meet and see everyone virtually. My name's Rochelle, and I'm our head of business intelligence and data strategy. So, very quick background on myself. I have always chased the hard to measure. And social is incredibly hard to measure. And we'll talk a little bit about why and how to overcome that challenge. But that is, my tagline, what I think best describes my career to date. Um, Now, your second question on the TikTok or reel that I've shared. Um, so I have the Chanel bomb in my cart because of this TikTok that I've shared, that all of my friends have shared, with Margot Robbie in Wuthering Heights. So she has the best blush. I'm a blush girly. And I've got Berry Blast or whatever the name is, Berry something. And it's officially sold out across Canada and the US. So I'm waiting patiently for that to come back in stock, but that's the TikTok that I have been obsessing over and sharing with all my pals.
All right, I like it. Joel, what about you?
Nice to meet you all. I'm Joel. I lead our talent, social, and influencer strategy here at Weight Watchers. I've been here for a little over a year now. My background is more on the talent and casting side. I started in more traditional casting at a few media networks, including Disney, MTV, Bravo, and then transitioned over to the brand side about 5, 6 years ago at this point, and really seeing how talent has sort of changed in 2026 as the media networks are sort of adapting to changing times and influencer. And for me, I'm just super passionate about talent, storytelling. I think I feel like social media and influencers sometimes get a bad rap, but for me, it's such a great incubator for who is the next person kind of holding people's attention. So it's always really fun. And I have to say I'm chronically online, so I'm definitely all about it. Um, the last TikTok, I send TikToks all the time, so it's like changes per every 20 minutes. The last one that I think I sent today was probably a teaser for Rob Roush from The Traders. He's gonna be on Jake Shane's podcast. So,
Love
just
that
a melding of two things
podcast.
that I'm very interested in. Um, but I definitely love like a comedic thing. I also do a lot of my shopping on TikTok. So I'm with you, Rochelle, on that.
Oh my God, mine
Traders
is
has
so
been overtaking my feed, by the way.
It,
I'm seeing it everywhere.
it's a
I've yet
lot.
to watch it, but I think I need to because I see all the clips.
It's fun.
I feel like my reel is so boring. It's literally just a family going like, "What do you want to have for dinner? What do you want to have for dinner?" Like the endless quest of like, "What are we going to eat tonight?" All right, let's get into it. So, Rochelle, we actually have some mutual friends that I hadn't realized who have said that you are brilliant in this space, giving you the thumbs up and that we should all be listening to you. So, when you say that you're looking for more insights and intelligence from social signals, What does that mean for the rest of us?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, thank you. That's very kind of you. But the way I think about being more intelligent with social really and simply is how are we using data to inform our strategy, to inform our next move, to form our understanding of what had happened. And I think when you use, facts, data, meaningful insights, to shape your next move, that's when you're learning. And I think learning is effectively what optimization is. And optimization can happen at many different levels of sophistication. One is just observing what had happened, interrogating what you had seen, and using that to inform your next step. But it can also happen in very sophisticated ways, which, we'll talk about. Now, when I think about social, it has historically been incredibly hard to track organic social. It doesn't benefit from the same high frequency signals you even get from paid social, from other paid media formats. You also don't even have the same mechanisms and tactics that you can use for tracking for other media types. You can't add, a tracking link to every single asset type on organic social. You can't optimize for things like a click, traffic, sales on organic social. And despite those limitations, though, I think it is very possible to learn from social, to want to inform your social campaigns, but also to learn from social to inform what you're doing beyond social, to inform what you might be doing, even in television, print, radio, all of the traditional formats that go beyond digital, I think can definitely benefit and learn from social to see what are people and audiences saying about your brand, about your category, and just in general what they're saying online. Now, when I think about getting insight from social, I think there's a couple of ways to do that. First is, how are you just summarizing and quantifying outcomes? At a very simple level, that could be just looking at, how many views and engagements you generated. In more sophisticated ways, that could be relating and regressing, views and engagements against sales conversions. The other way you could do that is, getting deeper diagnostic understanding of what had happened and why. In simple ways, that could be looking at comments or engagement types like saves and shares. But in more sophisticated ways, that could be you thematically, encoding all of your commentary to understand if there's any intent themes and what people are saying in response to your posts. It could be increasing the frequency of insights. Instead of you looking at the very end of a program, that could be you looking every week. Or, at a very high frequency and sophisticated way, that could be doing that daily in real time. And then finally, the reason why I think it's important to, look at and summarize what had happened, quantify outcomes, get that at a high frequency is really so that you can, get more predictive, so that you can, have, a strong sense of what can happen next, based on what you had observed and, quantified what had happened previously. And so I talked a little bit about easy ways to do that, sophisticated ways of doing that. Now, in terms of how we do it, we're collecting social posts from hundreds of thousands of creator and brand social profiles. And so we're doing that at a very high frequency. We collect that on a daily basis. We get time series data across every single social post we're collecting across those profiles. And in addition to that, we're also ingesting not just, the captions, the descriptions, the metrics, but also, multimodal data. Now, what that means is we're collecting the videos, the images, the assets. And from there, we're able to use large language models to do deeper detection of, that multimodal data to understand, things like what is the tonality, the creative, the intended approach behind that social post. And with that, us as Viral Nation have not just been able to collect performance metrics, but we're doing it at high frequency, and we're also encoding hundreds of different attributes that we think can actually help predict outcomes on social. So there's many different levels of sophistication. So even if you can't get to that sort of space that Viral Nation is at today, I think there's definitely still something that you can learn from this session and still activate with information that's readily available to you.
I love that you broke it down both from like what is accessible for people to do right now to, yes, more kind of sophisticated predictive modeling. And also that you mentioned comments, because I think comments are going to be so important this year. I'm hearing that in so many conversations. Do you have any examples or any sort of results or lift that you have seen from
Mhm.
relying on these signals?
Yeah. So, I mean, first, I mentioned how we're collecting hundreds of different predictive attributes that can drive outcomes. So, we see across all of the clients where we've been using those predictive attributes to shape the right creative and content strategy. We have seen a statistically significant increase after deploying that method versus before that method. And we've seen that across different objectives and metrics that a client is driving for, whether that be, views, engagements. For some clients, we've also even seen the relationship between views and engagements against sales. And so we've also seen incrementality. Most recently, we did this for a client where we learned that views is most related to sales for them. We tried to optimize their content organically against that views objective, and we were able to hit their 20% sales goal. And that 20% is really big for this brand because they're very mature. They're already generating a ton of sales. They're facing a ton of headwinds in markets. That was a really great case study. Now, another advantage of us being able to track these metrics at a high frequency is obviously driving outcomes, but also being able to capitalize on a moment. So, last year, Jules LeBron demure moment was
Very
huge. It was all
demure,
over my
yes.
feed. Yeah, all over my feed. And that trend picked up within hours and days. And because of our high frequency signals, and we're looking at trends in real time, not just within a campaign, but overall social, we were able to detect that trend very fast, pitch it to a brand where we thought there was really strong alignment, and that brand within days activated Jules LeBron and that creator. Tons of brands were in Jules's inbox. But having data sort of helped that brand benefit from that first mover's advantage. It felt really authentic because they were the first, to market with Jules, but also because, it aligned to that brand too.
I love that. I haven't heard very mindful, very demure in a little while, but,
I know.
yeah, a good
Yeah.
callback to
Yeah.
last year. Um, Joel, for you to kind of bring this to life, what are your thoughts on the signals era? Is it on Weight Watchers' radar? Like, how are you thinking about this or approaching this?
Yeah, so I think that like especially from where I sit, you kind of have to be looking at these signals and paying attention because to Rochelle's point, organic social and influencer is a little bit harder to track from just like a mechanism standpoint. Rochelle, and I've had the pleasure of working with her before. She's such a genius when it comes to all this data and really analyzing the data. But like for someone like myself who has been described as more of a vibes director and going off of vibes.
Vibes are good. Vibes
Yeah,
count.
exactly.
Important.
My husband coined that. But I think it's like you really have to be chronically online and start paying attention to things that you're seeing sort of in the wild. And if you're not somebody that can spend X amount of hours on social, like make sure you have a team that is really able to kind of catch things as they're coming because there isn't an exact science necessarily for tracking what's going to take off or what's going to perform well. It's really, paying attention to the trends in market. And, for me, and I'm able to sort of track it based off of is this influencer getting high engagement on their posts? They might have 2 million followers, but if you see that they're not breaking X amount of likes on a post, you can kind of start to predict how they're going to perform when you add a branded messaging to what they're working on. And so it's really being able to take the data and the things that you have readily available and then moving quickly and applying it. One of the reasons that I love that I've transitioned more into social and influencer marketing is in more traditional casting, a lot of the decisions really are just like, I'm the expert, that's why we should do this. Whereas now you can kind of really use the data that you have to make more informed decisions on who you should go out to, who you should work with, but then also report back, hey, this was the right decision because of, it drove, 20% of sales to Rochelle's point earlier. And so really making sure that you're both using the creative mixed with the data. It's super important, and it also just is an important loop to have internally, especially with leadership who might not understand influencer or social or the reason we would be doing hopping on a trend, and then reporting back like, hey, because we did this, this is what we got out of it, so we should do more of it, and we should put more money into this section of the organization.
I mean, that's sort of the beauty of social, right? Is like that ability to kind of incorporate those insights almost immediately. But not every brand is like that or can adjust that quickly. So I think, especially for legacy brands or anybody who's online right now saying, like, we can't activate in kind of 24 hours. How do you think about, those fast pivots, like encouraging a test and learn approach or kind of embracing a test and learn approach within the brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think test and learn is where it's at. Like, I think that you have to, obviously, I've worked at really big corporations and then really small startups, and so definitely understand that there are some blockers, if you will, at moving quickly on things. But I think that the more that you can internally vouch for the reasoning why we should do something. And I think that a lot of times that comes from utilizing the data that you have on hand. So, like, I think, I've worked with Viral Nation specifically before, and it was like we were working on a huge company that was very antiquated, very slow moving. And the only way that we were able to push through on certain things was because we were like, hey, here's the data, here's the market research, and by the way, it took me a full year at that company to actually start working on the actual influencer program. It was like I had to do all this internal pitching. So I think that's an extreme, but I do think that it's important to be very vocal, to pull together reports, to, if you do see something, take a creative risk on it and then really be able to report back on it. Because that's the only way. I mean, especially with influencer, it's so fluid and everyone has a perspective on it that if you don't have like a very strong POV backed by data, you'll get eaten alive. Like, like these you'll like roll out with the waves and it's over. So it's really important to use data to help you make these pitches to leadership.
Yeah,
And
you
it's
can.
something
Oh,
that,
sorry.
like, oh no, I was like, I
Go
was
for it.
resonating so much with what you were saying. I was like, I need to chime in because I always tell my team that the best way for someone to empathize with your message is through data, right? Like there's a lot of, different domain experts, someone who might be in an organic social and an influencer versus someone, who's on, finance or in HR or other departments who might need visibility into what you're doing. And the fastest way to socialize a message and simplify a message and get someone to empathize with what you're trying to communicate is doing that through data. And so I feel like all of what you said, Joel, is really an example of that, where you use data to socialize a message and get movement in your organization.
Definitely.
As said by a data person, I would have
I
said
know. I'm
storytelling.
biased.
I'm like, I think
Yeah,
to me, it's a balance. Like, you
it
can
is
go
about.
in with
Yeah,
vibes. I think you
yeah,
go in with
yeah, yeah.
storytelling and vibes, but yes, then you absolutely need to have it backed up by
You
data.
need both. You need the story and the right data to get the message across.
Yeah. Um, Joel, what about in terms of influencers, creators that you're working with right now? Like, how are you thinking about who do you like working with, and what type of creator are you thinking about working with in 2026?
Yeah, so I think there's the general who I like working with in 2026, and then the Weight Watchers answer, which might not be as relevant, but I can kind of explain our process. But I think for me, and just in general, the way I sort of approach talent and social and influencer is actually very mature in 2026. People are very aware of what it is. We scroll past ads as we see them if they're not relevant or they don't grab your attention. And so for me is like what is going to make somebody stop and want to watch this? And so who are the influencers who are driving conversation? Who are the influencers who have something very relevant to say for your brand? I think a lot of brands tend to just, they're like, oh, the West Village NYC girlies, they're really popular right now. Let's try and book them because they're doing everything. And it's sort of like, but how are you going to stand out? And it's really important to cast talent that feels very much authentic to your brand, which seems to be very obvious. But I do think, especially with like a Weight Watchers, when we're dealing with weight loss journeys and, a little bit more sensitive topics, we really make sure that all of the people that we're engaging with have something to say that's relevant to this conversation, because we'll also just get eaten alive if we don't. But at the same time, it's like our members and our audience, they want to see that somebody is, genuinely following the program or using the app or tracking their food. And I think it's super important. And then just generally, and this is just because I'm a fan of the medium, it's like, is this going to drive conversation? Is somebody going to watch this and be like, oh my gosh, that's so cool, I'm going to share it? I think shares for me, and this is not what my whole strategy is built off of, but if I see a high number of shares, I know I did something right. And that kind of goes back to the signals where I'm like, this isn't an exact science, but I know people literally saw this and wanted to send it to somebody. And that to me is like a sign of success. And so that's sort of how I look at it. And then, I think for the brand, you have to go to the brand, understand the target audience, understand who you're trying to go after, identify those influencers that fit that mold. And, once again, it's like that's where data also comes in. It's like you can pull their audience demographic, you can pull what countries they're relevant in. And so those are also ways for us to justify decisions. But I do think, to your point earlier, it does come with like, data isn't the only thing that you should go off of, because you also need to make sure that the storytelling is there, because you're not really future proofing your brand. You're not really creating any sort of real conversation if you're just going off data.
Yeah.
It's a balance. One thing I did want to ask you, Joel, is that I looked through the Weight Watchers Instagram and I felt like there was a mix of creators, but also employees and health experts. And I think EGC, or like employee generated content, seems to be growing this year. So can you talk a little bit about that in terms of like which talent do you match to which message?
Yeah, so for Weight Watchers specifically, and I'm sure people on the call have varying degrees of knowledge. Most people know what Weight Watchers is, but a lot of people are like, oh, that's that my mom did that. But Weight Watchers as a company and a brand, we're very driven by community and our members are sort of like the foundation of everything that we do. So our talent strategy overall is very member first. And whether you are a member advocate with 500 followers or you're a celebrity like Queen Latifah with 8 million plus followers, it's like we really want to make sure that the way that we brief people is that everyone's a member. We're getting them on the program. We're, making sure that they sign up for the app. They're tracking. They're, doing all this stuff. And I think that that's how we look at everything. And I think that then you just pull different levers based off of what your messaging is. If you're looking to maybe bring on some younger people, drive awareness among a little bit of a younger audience, then you might look at this person. If we're promoting our new menopause product, you're obviously going to go to a certain other demographic and celebrities and doctors and experts that are really tapped into that. Obviously, the conversation around GLP-1s is a very sensitive one, and we do offer access to GLP-1s through our Weight Watchers clinic, but it's like those conversations have to be talked about in a way that is delicate and sensitive to the topic that's being covered. So for that, it's like our chief medical officer is a great person who can kind of speak to that. Other doctors that we work with are other people that can really speak from an educated place when it comes to that messaging. So it kind of just depends, but I think generally, especially with social, we want to make sure we're making this brand feel fresh. So we want to partner with people that both we're already using it that you may not have even known, and then also contracting that new people that we can kind of integrate into our program, knowing that they've spoken about or have gone on their own weight loss journey in the past.
I
Mhm.
love that approach. And we're almost out of time. So, Rochelle, I'm going to ask you one last question, but I'm also going to say we're going to take two questions at the end. Try and fit that in within our 30 minutes. So if anybody has questions, leave them in the Q&A and we'll get to those in a second. I would say, Rochelle, for the last, from your perspective, is there anything, you talked a little bit before about sort of the like base level things that you could do and more sophisticated measurement that you could do. Anything for
Mhm.
anybody logging off, like, today, thinking about signal intelligence? Like, what would you recommend? Maybe a couple of thought starters or tips at this point?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think there were so many good things that you shared, Joel, on how you were thinking about data and integrating it. And one thing that you said that resonated that I think is a good starting point is be chronically online. Look at what is being said, surrounding your brand on social in general, in the comments. Be a sponge and, look at everything. Now, that would be the first starting point. The next on, storytelling and using data to integrate that, I really think data is a great vehicle for your story. So, I think a lot about the difference between, quantity and quality. So when you're looking at your metrics, don't just look at the quantitative outcomes, whether that be your views, your impressions, your, total counts, but also look at the quality of those outcomes. And I think that's where you can get a much more nuanced narrative and deeper understanding of what's happening. So, that could be you looking at commentary. That could be you looking at the engagement types. And if you have, more shares and saves, that could be really telling on the impact of that content, even if it had, lower likes and comments. So I think those are great starting points. One other thing I'll say is start collecting your own data. So, in very simple ways, it could be you tracking all of that in a spreadsheet at the very end of a program, or a date that you align on for every single post, and then starting to learn from that. Starting to develop benchmarks and norms to help contextualize what you might be doing. Down the line when you reactivate. And I think like once you start getting proof points that you're driving improved performance, I think you can then use that to socialize across the business and get, more resources, better access to tools, support from your business intelligence and data engineering team because you've shown the value of using data. Now, like at the end of the day, when I think of data and its role in social, the intention isn't just to collect data, it's to drive action. It's to, work much smarter and not to work harder, to be more efficient with your spend and your dollars and your time. So I think, starting small, using that as proof points to get more access to resources, and then evaluating the benefit of the effort in collecting data and the return that you're seeing from doing that.
Okay, let me tie this in. Since we're running out of time, I'm going to tie this into the first question that we got, which is, and I think either one of you can answer it, but it was certainly ties into what you were just saying. Which metric do you believe is most underrated when calculating social ROI and why?
So many
Anybody?
thoughts. I
Yeah.
mean, I can kickstart. I mean, there you know what? Like I think I think comments is definitely a place where there's a lot of richness. Now I think when you look at a singular post comments, that might not give you a whole lot of actionable insight, but start looking at that at a, greater scale. Looking at that across every single post that you've got on your own social feed, looking at commentary for competitive brands, look at commentary for, your total category. So an individual comment might not have much meaning, but once you look at that metric at scale, it can really give you deeper insight into the intent behind a consumer. And so we've done a ton of these analyses where we've been able to detect, folks who have purchase intent, people who are inquisitive and confused about your brand and your messaging. And so I think there's so much value that you can use from comments to be able to better inform the outcomes that you're having.
Joel, I'm going to give you the last word because somebody else said they loved the signals of success for influencer partnerships. Shares isn't one I've looked at before. So again, it kind of goes back to that metric question. Do you want to close us out with your thoughts on like why shares are so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to the first question and kind of tie into what we're talking about is it really depends also like where your brand sort of is. Like if you have a ton of followers and you're getting average views that are pretty high, but then no engagement, it's like you want to get the engagement up. If you have a brand that isn't getting average views at a certain level, then you want to get the views up. And the views are showing that people are sitting there and watching your content that might not have watched it before. I think just in general, especially at a brand like Weight Watchers, which has decent engagement, it also has, decent views per post, which we're always trying to improve on that. I think for us, it's very much like the shares are really showing like kind of to start our the way we started our conversation is it's very much like I want to take this and show it to somebody else, and it's showing the value of the content that is worth sending to your friend, because you want to send the cool stuff and you want to send the things that you think are relevant to your friend. And seeing that is just showing that people are actively not only watching the content, but they're also sending it around to people who might not have even been following the account. And so that way it gets more people even interested in the account and into the channel. Um, but yeah, it's also interesting because it's like, I think that as things evolve, how often are you as a, consumer commenting on a brand's post? That almost sometimes doesn't even show the full value of the post, because if you're just tracking comments, it's like, well, I don't ever comment on a brand's post, and that's just me, and I work in this. So I think the sharing is almost more valuable because it's showing that I'm actually willing to, share the content. So it changes. And I think it's like, once again, to go back to vibes, it does depend on sort of where you're at your brand. But for me, as somebody who wants to drive conversation for social, I think that is one of the signifiers for that really showcases that.
Yeah.
I love you. You basically did my job for me, tying this all back around to what we were talking about at the beginning, sharing, Reels and TikTok and those as like a really powerful signal. We're going to wrap it up there because we only had 30 minutes. I think we might have gone over time. Thank you so much for everybody who watched. Thank you to Joel and Rochelle. Not to forget, we are going to be recording this so you can rewatch it. And then there is also a resources section at the bottom of your Zoom. So if you just kind of scroll over your Zoom screen, you'll see that little resources folder, engineering social era report from Viral Nations in there, and you can grab that. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.